Now we're going to move on to our next featured speaker of the day. That would be Trent Mell. Trent is the CEO of Electra Battery Metals, formerly known as First Cobalt. He's going to be virtually sitting down with the director editor of mining.com, Frick Els. Let me introduce Frick, and he will in turn introduce Trent. Frick has over 20 years experience as a business journalist across a range of industries, including investment, automotive, technology, and travel and leisure markets. He has an entry in Global Mining Observer's Who's Who of Mining and contributions to publications and conferences, including Business Insider, Investing.com, Mines and Money London and New York, Vancouver Resources Investment, Progressive Mine Forum in Toronto, and the Canadian Mining Symposium in London. He's been interviewed on CBC Radio and Korea State TV, and in 2020 created the mining.com EV Metal Index, which tracks the value of battery metals in newly sold electric cars around the world, and makes him particularly well suited to this next interview with Trent Mell. Hello, Frick, and hello, Trent. Great to see you both. I will turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Anthony. Hi, Trent.
Hello.
Great to be talking to you. I mean, you're in an exciting phase of your business. Just 2 weeks ago, you kind of changed from First Cobalt to Electra Battery Materials. I first just need to say also that you have a 2-decade record in mining. So this is not your first company. You were also CEO of Falco, where you brought 6 million gold ounces into being. You are head of mining for Pear Tree Securities, and I believe over your 20 years, M&A, equity financing, offtakes, etc., it all adds up to about $2.6 billion, which, if my math is correct, is 130 million a year. So you got we're already 11 months into this year, but I think you've exceeded that. Tell us a bit about why we're no longer First Cobalt but Electra.
Yeah, thanks, Frick, for the opportunity, and Anthony. Yeah, it's been a ride. We started the company 4.5 years ago. 2017, cobalt was the best performing commodity, and we set about on a journey to find cobalt for the North American electric vehicle market. Our success came in a different form. We were looking at mineral assets in Cobalt, Ontario, and again in the state of Idaho. So the Idaho asset is still very much a focus of ours. We still have an asset there, but along the way we merged a few companies together. We picked up this refinery, and I think in our discussions now with the downstream, we're 12 months away from first production with the Cobalt asset, the Cobalt Plant, but the automotive companies need more. And if you think of the supply chain and all the investments we've seen this year, it's assembly, it's the battery plant, and now they're looking at the cathode active material. And just before that, the next step upstream between our refinery and cathode material is PCAM, precursor material production, and that's a real gaping hole in North America. Yeah. And so the auto companies are saying, look, if you can create a complex like we see in Harjavalta in Finland and elsewhere in China, can create an environment where a PCAM producer can come and co-locate with you. Don't worry about the nickel. Like we can backfill all of that environment sort of with you. And so we've outlined now with the Electra name. I wanted to wait till the financing was done on what is now phase 1, the Cobalt Plant, but it's a 4-step process. Cobalt production next year, battery recycling, then nickel and PCAM to encompass a larger solution for the EV supply chain.
Right. And you're obviously you fueled to the finish for the Cobalt Plant, and then you go on to the next phase, which is recycling. I was wondering about that. I've read a few reports that says recycling of battery materials is kind of in the future, that we're going to need primary supply for a good while yet. We know when the battery in a Tesla is past its best life, it goes into a battery pack for home solar. Tell us a bit more about the recycling, because that could be a big part of the whole EV story, right?
Yeah, it's big. It's a huge priority for the EVs, the auto manufacturers, because they've got teams of people trying to figure out what do you do with end of life batteries. And you're right, Frick, the end of life battery for an EV is some time off, particularly on this continent where we're late to the party. On the other hand, we've all got phones and laptops, portable tools, toys, right, that have lithium ion batteries. And so that's the market where everybody is focused. So the opportunity in the future is going to be fairly large homogeneous batteries. So actually, in some ways, maybe it gets easier as the tonnage goes up. The opportunity today is a more diverse set of batteries that contain a lot of cobalt relative to an EV. So the opportunity there is some high margin. The challenge you have with EVs today, or at least the recycling component, we've got a peer in the recycling market looking to build a plant in the US for some 350 million US. And so the payback when the tonnages are smaller, it's a long horizon. In our case, we're going to have a $200 million plant built next year, right? It'll be up and running, same team, a lot of the same equipment. In fact, some of the equipment that's there now that we are not redeploying for the new Cobalt plant is going to be redeployed for recycling. So for us, it's a two-step process. It's a demonstration plant next year, focusing on the leach and then the extraction. And then the second step is going to be the beneficiation of the extracted minerals into a usable form so that you can kind of close that loop up. And you're learning it with a growing supply chain, and you're learning, in tandem with the growing supply of batteries.
Right. So you said it's quite cobalt rich, the recycling material. So we're talking iPhones and mobile phones here.
Yeah, it's the LCO cathode. So in contrast, the dominant cathode, of course, in the EVs, as you know, is the NCM, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and the ratio of cobalt to nickel has gone down quite a bit. Not so with your portable electronics. And so when we look at it, I should point out our VP project development, Mark Trevisio, ran the Glencore smelter in Sudbury for a time, and he was there when they started whole battery recycling. So we've got some great bench strength, and we've got to view the margin opportunity is big. You got to do it right. I think there's a lot of talk about technology. A lot of people like to tout their recycling processes. It's a leach, right? I think we overstate that as an industry, as part of our own sales pitch. I think the challenge really is the infrastructure required to get it off the ground. Right.
I believe the stuff is called Black Mass, which sounds a bit like a Stephen King novel. Tell us a bit more about that. How does this work exactly? You said it's a leach process, so maybe it's not rocket science after all.
Yeah, and thank you for the prompt, because when you think of battery recycling, there are two distinct steps. The first step is, I'll call it more logistical in nature, where you're collecting the batteries. So picture, warehouses all over America, concrete bunkers, because these things can catch fire, explode. So you collect the batteries, you assemble them, you discharge them, you take the casing, the plastics out, take the coil off of it, and then you're going to basically crush and sieve the residual. It's the anode and the cathode material. And so what you're left with is a black sand, a black powder, which is why we call it the black mass. Not a very great name. And so where we step in, not so much there, because there's a lot of players that do that well. People that are already in the auto supply chain, private company. Now, a company like Li-Cycle or Redwood Materials, two much larger treasuries than ours, want to do, I think, both parts. Certainly Li-Cycle does. We've got 25 contacts around the world that are already doing that. Why? Because most of them are going to a pyrometallurgical facility that happens to be in Sudbury. The recoveries aren't as good. The greenhouse gas emissions, they don't recover lithium, they don't get the graphite. And so where we step in is, once that black mass is produced, it would get delivered to us, and then we would put it into solution. So we've been quietly doing quite a bit of work in the last 6-8 months. We're about 2 weeks away from an engineering study where we're won't release all our secrets, but give an idea of what that might look like. It's a pretty low capex for us to step into that.
Right. So I guess a big part of your move to become Electra battery materials was nickel. I mean, everybody's heard Elon Musk asking for nickel, people to make more nickel, and at the same time, you also have battery technologies changing. LFP, which no nickel, no cobalt, has become a real big success. I think in China, maybe it's captured almost half of the market in a short period. But you're betting big on nickel, obviously.
Yeah, and the LFP quality of that battery has gone up, no question about it. It's still not going to find its way into luxury vehicles. Yeah. And in northern climates, LFPs don't perform very well in the cold. So I don't think they have a huge future in North America or Europe. particularly for the luxury lines and some of these newer vehicles that we're seeing out there. But I won't discount it. It's been helpful. You know, the downside to LFPs, they're cheaper, easier to make. You can't recycle them. There's nothing in there to recycle. So there's an end of life challenge there. But look, our view on NCM, the battery market's been, or sorry, the EV market's growing at a CAGR of 26% through to 2030. You know, the supply demand, there's room for a lot of different cathodes out there. North America's got a lot of nickel. The challenge we have when we launched this new brand, we likened ourselves to the role of a bridge, right? Bridging the resource endowment that we've got in the continent with all the EV plants that are now being built. Right now, we're mining our nickel. China, I think, is about 90% of the nickel sulfate conversion market. So to mine it in Canada, convert it in China, and then bring it back into a North American EV doesn't make sense from a sustainability perspective, nor from a cost of the cells.
Right. And that was actually one of my questions. I do sense that there is, you know, apart from obviously market developments and EV demand and uptake, there is kind of a geopolitical aspect to all of this as well, that the center of gravity in mining and definitely the EV world is kind of shifting east. It's more Europe, it's North America. Do you think that everything you produce and take in almost is going to be from North America or from ex-China, so to speak?
So the feedstock for cobalt is trickier, right? Because most of that's concentrated in the Congo. So we'll be purchasing feed from 3 of the 4 biggest cobalt operations in the world, China, Mali, and Glencore. And we've got 5-year contracts there. Nickel, you know, again, in discussing with the automakers, the advice is let's focus on PCAM, and then we will jointly figure out the nickel. And I don't want to, you know, I don't want to simplify it. The nickel plant relative to the cobalt plant is a big lift. But we've got a federal government that's got a $2 billion strategic innovation fund. They want to build out the supply chain. This is an area we can control. So it'll be a joint effort at the end of the day. But I do think when it comes to the nickel inputs, I don't know why you would need to go beyond North America, given the endowments that we have on both sides of the border.
Right. And there's, as you mentioned, there is a political will now, you know, after decades of neglect, people seem to have woken up about critical minerals and supply chains. Yeah, I guess COVID also gave all of this a bit of a boost as well. So there's onshoring is definitely a trend.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we started the company, we toured DC. We were in the White House. In fact, I was back there a few months back now. So there's acute attention, and there's a greater understanding. It's not so much going to them explaining the importance of the supply chain. It's more, how can we help you? So the political awareness is always there. There's still the NIMBYism on extraction. You know, if you go to DOD, DOE, they'll help you with infrastructure, plants, and things of that nature. They don't really want to get in the extraction game. So there's some work to be done on that side. But to your point about onshoring, where the discourse has changed is really within the boardrooms of the auto companies and their battery partners, right? The investments are being made here. COVID, microchip shortages, it just underlines the obvious that our supply chains are too big. We're circumnavigating the world sometimes twice over to get our battery parts to us or our car parts. And there's a real focus on getting that domesticated. And now you've got the ESG rationale to do it as well, right? Measuring your Scope 3 emissions for transport of these elements around the world is going to be accounted for in your vehicle. And that's an important attribute that consumers are looking at.
Right. And also it gives auto manufacturers something to say, right? That they're, I mean, I think international shipping is something like 17% of global emissions, or anyway, it's huge. So it's part of everything is part of a bigger process, right? And I think that's where you kind of tap into a whole range of different processes or trends that are going on.
Yeah, I mean, container rates, I think, are 10x out of China that what they were a year ago. So, and delays, right? When we ordered our plant equipment for our refinery, we made a deliberate decision not to order stuff out of China. We had options to build them in Europe, North America, or China. We thought we can't do China because of the unreliability of that network when you're on a tight construction timeline. We get 12 months until we're producing. So that's an important part. The other piece that plays in our favor when we talk to the supply chain is being in Canada, right? We've got a hydroelectric dam a matter of kilometers away from us. So we're 100% hydroelectric. So we've got clean power. It's hydromet, so we've got zero emissions. there will be no cleaner cobalt sulfate production on the planet. We know that for a fact, and I think we can carry that through to the nickel production, to the PCAM as well, and that plays into the overall narrative that we're trying to strive for. Right.
Even though it's a North American story, there's also a bit of internecine fighting in the industry. So there's a question from the audience here about the Buy America First, that kind of thing. I know there's ongoing talks about that. What is your view of that particular? I guess it's part of NAFTA, the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it started with the last administration where there was a big push to support this onshoring, but I think, frankly, just good business, sound business decisions reinforce that. And if the Buy America has to do with Canada relative to the U.S., well, it doesn't really impact Canada. If you look under, for instance, the Defense Procurement Act, where DoD can step in and buy materials and fund projects, Canada is treated no different than any other of the U.S. states, and it's the only country in the world that gets that kind of special treatment. There's a critical minerals roundtable, cabinet ministers from Ontario, Quebec, Ottawa, in touch with White House officials and others, and we're part of that dialogue. So I think there's a view that Canada can and must play an important role, particularly because mine development is easier in this country, and the resource side is a piece they see us really playing a role in.
Yeah, and I do believe Biden has said that they're not that much into mining, but they're very much into processing.
Yeah.
So at least Canada can fill the whole supply chain. I mean, as Electra is a example of that. You also have a cobalt project in Idaho.
Yeah, I mean, the cobalt plant, I guess it'll have to. It's an open question, I think, what the future holds. Right? Are we a chemicals company, as some of the analysts are now starting to characterize us as? Are we vertically integrated, or do we have two different companies in one? I think we'll have to wait and see, because that Idaho asset, cobalt's had a great run. It's sitting at about $29 on the metal side from a low of 12. I think we'll finish over 30 this year. So I wouldn't want to make any rash decisions, but as we continue to drill, and I do see a mine there. It's a few years out, and the question is whether you would do that within Electra or try to farm it out or do some other value accretive transaction for our shareholders.
Right. You mentioned prices, and cobalt is up substantially. Lithium is at an all-time high. Nickel itself is up double digits, if not more. Is there a bit of a chicken and egg situation maybe arising where there's huge demand for EVs? It pushes up raw material prices, and then at some point it becomes a little bit too expensive, and there comes demand destruction, because raw materials is almost 50-40% of the cost of an EV. What gives first, the prices or the demand?
I should probably be asking you that question. I have that. I'm in the UK actually currently, and meeting with investors, and that's one of the questions I had this afternoon is how do you fix this? Anybody who studies the demand projections knows that the raw material supply is going to become an issue. I mean, 2 years ago, everybody was chasing their tails over cobalt. Now it's nickel. We're running to Indonesia looking for nickel deposits in a state that's going to have a terrible, carbon footprint, but it's going to be responsive to our demand needs. So we've got a lot of conflicting issues. We've got there's opportunities to develop assets in Western economies that are taking way too long to permit. But when I look at the supply chain, the resource extraction side just can't respond fast enough. For Electra and for what we're doing, I think our glide path is well timed. I think our cobalt's going to be early for this market, so a lot of it will follow our clients' battery making process back to Japan, Korea, maybe Europe. But as we get the PCAM and the nickel plant operating, I don't want to say the nickel is somebody else's problem, because we're going to have to source it from somewhere. But our view is we need partners. We're a tiny player in a land of giants, and if we can hitch a part of our wagon to a big automaker and their battery partner, then it gives us a little bit of security, because they are actively looking to lock down 5 to 10 years of nickel supply as we're developing our own asset out.
Right. You say you're a tiny player at 60,000 tons. That's kind of what you're targeting at the plant. That's not nothing.
That's not nothing. No, you're right. I mean, our cobalt plant we last week made the decision to upsize that. Our bottleneck was our crystallizer. So instead of 5,000 tons, subject to a permit amendment, we're going to be making 6,500 tons of cobalt. So, by at the 5,000 level, that's about 1.5 million EVs per year on an 811 cathode, with assumptions on battery size. So the nickel equivalent, it's a big number. I mean, it's not dissimilar to the plant that BHP just commissioned in Perth, right? They're making nickel sulfate there in Australia now, and the idea would be that we would replicate that. Do we do it alone or with a partner? I don't think it matters. I think the important thing is that we've got the permits, we've got the industrial park. We've quietly added to our footprint. We're now 600 acres of land, clay bedded infrastructure, and so I think this has to be with a view to vertical integration. Probably more than one client on the back end, and so we're working through some MOUs on that front, but we can't do it alone because the nickel plant is probably going to exceed it will exceed our 200 million market cap. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Right. Just on the same subject still, I'm just going to read this here, a question. BMO Vice Chair David Jacobson has warned of a potential critical mineral crisis, not unlike the 70s oil crisis. I mean, that's another, it's another way of looking at, raw materials prices. How likely is that scenario?
Yeah, look, I studied economics in school, so there are laws of supply and demand dictate that there's going to be a price response, and there'll have to be a supply response. I think policy is going to play a part of this, but I think we all see this wall of worry kind of building up instead of 4 and 5 years out. Part of my response to the same investor earlier today is I think the voice of a Jim Farley at Ford is going to be a little louder than Trent Mell at Electra, right, at the White House, saying here's what we need. And I think as they spend more, and you pointed out, Frick, they're so reliant on not just security of supply, but a logical cost structure for the sale price of their batteries, that I've been told this is right in the C-suite. Supply of cobalt and nickel is something they talk about at the top levels of the automakers. And I think it's those kinds of voices when they come to the table that's going to result in a couple of things. I think there'll be some policy changes. There'll be some structural changes to get these assets to market faster. And I will not be surprised to see auto companies buying more and more mining assets to lock up their critical needs.
Right. And also, I mean, if you look at Australia, they built, I think, 4 spodumene mines in like a 6-year period. So, if you bang some heads together, it can be done.
It's a bit like the COVID response, right, with the pharmacies and pharmaceutical companies and coming up with the vaccine. I mean, you need that oh shoot moment, if I can put it that way, right, for everybody to come together and realize we gotta act and act fast. And I think we're getting there. I guess I don't worry too much because I always assume that there will be a supply response. We've got some smart minds here in the industry to find the resources, but we're going to need the resolve and the support of the capital markets and the regulators to get them built faster.
Right. Yeah, we probably, maybe need a warp speed, like we had a warp speed program for vaccines. Why not have a warp speed program for cobalt, nickel, and lithium?
Correct.
It comes to that. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just going to see. What catalyst can be expected before a possible share consolidation is announced?
It's a shareholder talk.
We're getting into the weeds now.
I own a lot of shares of the company as well, at least for my net worth. It's a lot. And we bought an Aussie company a few years ago. So we've got 550 million shares out. And for us to pursue a US listing, we need 2 things. We need a higher stock price, a higher per share price, and we need fewer shares because the US institutional investor doesn't want that kind of a share structure. So look, my response is we're going to do it when it makes sense. Share consolidations can work, and they do work, but it's got to be for the right reasons. It can't be because you're down at a half penny and you need to do it because you're desperate. So I think, we got pretty good strength in the stock price now. Ideally, we would sign an offtake contract or an MOU with an auto company, and it's on the lift of something like that you could do it. But I think a NASDAQ listing will do us a lot of favors of rebuilding our institutional base and putting us in a position to raise the serious amounts of money we're going to need for phases 3 and 4 of our expansion plans.
Right. The phase 4, which is sort of mid-decade thereabouts, that you're looking at the Precursor Plant. Right. That's another area where I think the market probably needs a bit of education. What goes into a precursor plant? Why was China able to corner, I don't know, 70%, maybe more than 80% of the precursor market? And
yeah, can I show you a slide here? Let me just, this might help visualize. Can you see that, Frick? Or not?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what's going on in the market today. And this, so if you think of all the announcements that we've seen, Ford and SK Innovation, GM with LG Chem, Panasonic, Tesla. So, we've got these EV plants that have been announced. We've got these cell plants, and they're now turning their attention to the cathode side. Now I'm talking strictly on the cathode plants. This is the bottleneck, this PCAM, a precursor. And so the precursor is when you bring three refined, in the case of the NCM battery, the nickel cathode manganese, it's when you bring together the nickel, the cathode, the nickel, copper, and the manganese, the right quality, the right sort of particle size and characteristics to bind them with a bit of lithium before you then put them into the cathode. And so it's a fairly straightforward process. The margins are actually pretty good with PCAM. The challenge you have is you don't want to, if I jump ahead again here, you don't want to put that too far away from your refining, because when you refine a salt, a nickel or a cobalt salt, 80% of it is moisture. And so to bag that and truck that around the world, highly inefficient. So if you can put it together, here we go, as we've done in Harry-Volta, as we've done in parts of China, you get cobalt, nickel, recycling, PCAM. You're knocking about 10% off your OPEX on both sides because you're not crystallizing. So we would knock the cost of our recycling, of our refining down by eliminating a step, and we're not bagging, we're not shipping, we're not creating a carbon footprint. At the other side, you're pumping in the material in solution, so they don't have the dissolution step that would typically be required. So this is what we're trying to solve for. The advantage that we have is nobody's doing it, nobody has this kind of site, and the PCAM companies are trying to figure out how to invest in on the continent. And it's a small list. I don't think there are 10 ex-Chinese PCAM companies that we will be talking to, some of whom we are talking to, about setting up shop in our backyard. And I think that's a more achievable outcome than the nickel. The nickel is a heavier lift because of the tonnages we're going to require.
Right. Yeah, there is, and we've changed about changing technologies, but everybody is looking to eliminate cobalt, or as little as possible. On the other side of that is questions about thermal runaway. With so few EVs on the road, you don't hear that much about it, but there is, fires and how to put out electric fires. It might not be in the public's imagination at the moment, but it might soon be. Is there a bit of education or PR to be done for cobalt as a metal?
Yeah. I mean, I think the cobalt industry needed to clean up its act, right? The DRC issues of child labor and corruption, Dan Gertler, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you don't want to be in the DRC. On the other hand, that's where Mother Nature put the resources. Yes. And so as an industry, the likes of Tesla and VW have teamed up with the likes of ERG and Glencore to work with the Fair Cobalt Alliance to clean up that supply chain, right? Make sure I worked at Barrick, I've worked at big companies. You operate your mines around the world by the same standards. And if you go into these operations, they don't look dissimilar to what you'll see in the rest of the world, in Australia and elsewhere. So you gotta, it's sourcing, it's tracing, it's certification, it's third-party audits, and all of that is coming together. So then the elimination of cobalt in the battery, well, it stems from two things. One is the crazy prices we saw in 2017, $50 a pound, and a concern over what it did to the cost of the cathode and of course overall availability. And second, and maybe more importantly, because it had a lasting searing, I guess, image on the brain of these children working in mines of some of the artisanal plays. And that issue can be dealt with, just like we dealt with blood diamonds, just like we deal with tin from the Northeast. And the answer is there. I think we can get there. The challenge of getting cobalt out of the battery is real. The thermal runaway is real. And the dirty little secret is that I won't name any executives, but the car company execs that say they're going to zero cobalt, they're not going to cobalt zero. They're going to low cobalt. And so there's a little bit of a slip of the tongue. We're going from a 111 at the initial cathode, where it's a third nickel cobalt manganese. We're on our way from a 622 to 811, so 80% nickel. And in many cases, we're at 90% nickel. So nickel gives you that range and that density. Going to zero cobalt, the auto company engineers will tell you it's just, the trade-offs are not worth it. The risk reward of a little bit of extra mileage and the risk of thermal runaway is just not there. So I don't see it. Even the ELNO, some of the new technologies you're hearing out of Europe. There's small amounts. They're taking it out of the name for marketing reasons.
Right. Yeah, and I also read that I think it's LG Chem, or I don't know if it's CATL, it's got a LFP NCM hybrid battery, a bit of both. So it never stands still on the cathode side.
Yeah, no, that's new to me as well. I saw that a day or two ago. I got my VP commercial. I should have asked him about it before you asked me, because I don't know much about it, but there is this twinning. I mean, you think of a hybrid, right, where you get a combustion engine with an electric vehicle. The dual motor structure doesn't make a lot of sense from an economics perspective. The dual cathode, though, I don't know what that represents. It's an interesting concept. Certainly, I think there's a Mercedes hybrid that's using some LFP, right? So you just give that little extra boost. The challenge we have in the Western, particularly in North America, what do we want? We want long range. We want 600-700 kilometer ranges, and we're starting to see that now in the new vehicles. And we want big cars, right? We want that F-150 is a beautiful, beautiful pickup. The Rivian, the R1T. I mean, people have different views on the Tesla Cybertruck, but those big cars are coming. I think the Ford Mustang was a big hit, sold out. Microchips is kind of holding them back. But I think the world is changing. There's room for a lot of cathode given the demand projections for EVs.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mercedes. I was surprised that I think 1 out of 5 Mercedes sold this year was electric. So, one tends to concentrate on a Tesla or the Rivian, with share prices, stratospheric share prices. But a good old Merc. Electric Merc is probably in your future.
I bought a Tesla 3 a couple of years ago, and in North America, you didn't have a lot of choices, right? There was an Audi, there was, I can't remember what else. There was very little to choose from. At the Shanghai Auto Show going on right now, I think there's about, I recall, 239 different models of new energy vehicles that are being displayed as we speak. Half of them are pure EV, and the other half roughly are hybrids. So the selection has already doubled this year. We've gone from 14 to 28 in the US. It's going to go up by another 60% next year. So we in Canada are going to be the beneficiaries of greater availability. But the European models that are out there now, the microcars, we just wouldn't like them. I mean, Anthony likes a big car. He doesn't want to drive a micro hatchback or whatever. But it's coming. It's coming. You know this as well as I do, Frick, because I know you follow it equally close. It's moving fast. I think so. Let me just one last thought before Anthony turns off my mic. Last year during COVID, passenger sales in Europe were down 26%. EV sales were up, I think, threefold, roughly, if my math is right. Year to date in North America, I think we're up 140%. The investment announcements, the velocity of investments, the amount of dollars that are being thrown to infrastructure in North America suggests to me that the EV adoption rate in North America is a lot closer than people think. And I think in 2 years from now, it'll be a very different landscape.
Right.
Excellent, gentlemen. Yeah, Trent, it's hard to get the kids and the dog into the back of a micro. That is the issue. So you can cram them back there, but they won't be happy about it.
They'll be hearing about it.
Exactly. Listen, both of you, really enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. Frick, excellent questions as always. I think we all got a lot out of that. Thank you. We saw that from the responses as well from the delegates. Great questions from our delegates as well. Thanks Trent.
Everybody.
Continued success.
Thank you, Trent.
Thank you.